And we are back with another LinkedIn Live. We have a really fun one today. Joining me from the Gen City team is Mike Moreno, our head of BD, longtime grizzled and sometimes grouchy industry veteran, our fabulous head of marketing, MK Granados, and our special guest, Rita Price of MC Squared.
He just gave me a new name. Thanks, everybody.
We already have one Marino on. We already have one Marino on, right?
I know. Rita, why don't you give your background? I do it for you, but I wouldn't do it justice. Tell everybody a little bit about your time in the event space. Tell them a little bit about MC Squared as well. I think almost everybody should know MC Squared. If you don't know MC Squared, I'd be shocked. But awesome. Why don't you give a little bit of a bio?
Yeah, thank you. I am the SVP of Experiential Innovation at MC Squared. We're a brand experience agency. 3 of our clients were on the Best of CES list just this year. Samsung Electronics has been on the list 9 years in a row. Hyundai Heavy Industries is their 2nd time in the top 10, and EssilorLuxottica, this was their 1st time at CES, and they also made the list, so super proud of that. Personally, I have been 25 years in events and marketing across largely tech and entertainment. What I do at MC Squared is lead our experiential innovation focused on strategy, insights, and creative approach. Basically, I love to ask questions and figure things out. I'm super passionate about the trend today, theatrical storytelling. I was a theater nerd starting very early on. I have a core memory of hiding inside of a podium to play the sound effects on a boombox for The Diary of Anne Frank. And I made the sound effects tape myself using actual records and little sound effects of like a doorbell ringing. So that continued into high school, where I coincidentally met my now husband, but we didn't get married until 20 years later. So we did meet in theater, of course, in high school. And then I went to film school, and right out of film school, I created a film festival. And then since then, I've been many years in entertainment, marketing, and events. Can't seem to get away from the event space. So I guess I'm here to stay.
I mean, I feel like an MK can back me up on this. The event space, unless you're actually working directly for, a Broadway show or in theater, the event space is pretty much as close as you can get, right? Like it's not all of the drama, all of the passion, and all of the things that you're kind of going for with the big show. Awesome. Well, I'm super excited. Today's topic is really fun. For those of you guys in the audience, if you're joining us on LinkedIn right now, thank you. We appreciate you. If you're joining us on X or YouTube or on other platforms, we appreciate you all. I want to start off with the concept of theatrical storytelling and how it plays into events. So many people think of events as kind of trade show booths and things like that, which, can be very, very rote, very basic, very standard. How do you see today's topic kind of helping brands elevate themselves in the event space? And how do you kind of try to embrace that when you and your MC Squared team kind of take on new clients?
Yeah, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about sort of how we got here. So one of the reasons we even came up with this term is that my team goes on intentional trends journeys, right? Where we're at events, we try to synthesize what we're seeing so we can share it with our own teams and then with our clients. So coming back from shows last year, like Art Basel Miami, then CES this year, also mainstream events like the Super Bowl. And then also in the fall, I was at Disney World. So for the first time with a full family, we had 4 adults, 3 kids at Disney World. Sort of the combination of all those coming together really led us to this idea around theatrical storytelling, really that experience of more of a live show, not just seeing a show, being a part of a show, but also that idea of going on a ride, right? So when you think about that, that's sort of what got us just using that terminology. So as far as with brands, right? It's looking at those aspects that are connected to that theatrical moment, right? So we're thinking sort of along the lines of 4 elements, right? It's about the staging. That's really the environment, the visuals, all of that. Characters, whether that's your own staff or hired actors, literally, or performance-based activities. Action, which is what is really how the story is unfolding in real life. And then connection, which is really more about that shared audience experience, is that those things are all really exciting and apply directly to events, whether or not there's a literal live show going on. But the opportunity to think of it that way, I think, is really exciting. I was just on a call the other day where I said, what if you did have to create a run of show for just your booth, right? That we create run of shows for events where we have timed moments and timed activities, but for something like a booth or a pop-up experience where it's not necessarily like every moment is choreographed, how would you treat it differently if it was? I think those are some of the interesting questions that we can challenge ourselves to think about when we're designing experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned all those things about storyline and tapping into passion and drama and things with our clients as we're kind of developing a guest experience, right? Sometimes it can be a blessing when our clients come to us with a full-blown storyline and their brand is so tied to it, like we've done things for Disney and a lot of the networks and in sports and entertainment. But it can also be kind of intimidating because of the passion of the guests. You feel like you owe it to understand their passion in what they think the storyline is. And here you've got, if we do something for Disney Theatrical, which we have in the past, you're like, what do you do with the Frozen storyline? It's kind of like, we're going to take your lead, and hopefully we get this right, and all in a concise guest experience. It's a challenge. I applaud you for the discipline of, we need to think this through and get our process in the way we look at it.
That's one of the things I also say when we're on calls talking about that upfront strategy, is that I tend to be a challenger, right? Like our clients and they know themselves, right? But not necessarily in a language that speaks to everyone, right? So really being that bridge between what they're trying to tell and communicate and making it connect to the audience. I think another thing that I love about the idea of theatrical storytelling is the commitment. So I think that's another thing that we can see at really large scale with big brands who have a lot of money, right? But how do we scale that down, is that commitment. So one thing is we could see something at a show where there's a commitment to a thematic overlay. And that could be an example of theatrical storytelling, right? Like really committing to one direction, one path, and putting it all there. I think we do tend to have some wanting to do too much of everything, right? So that we end up doing very little of one particular thing very well. And that's one of the challenges I would think about, is how can you do this one really cool, amazing thing really well, tell it really well, get everybody really excited. And through that's how you bring them along to learn more. But oftentimes we want to do everything all at once. And then that sort of makes it a little more generic, which has, I think, always been a struggle with events, and in particular trade shows.
You brought up Disney, and I'm dialing in from my hotel room at Universal Orlando, and appreciating, like, when you talk about those themes, they have Harry Potter World, so doubling down on an immersive theme and a story, it comes down to the name of the food on the menu. It can be a standard meal, and any event attendee is going to eat a chicken dinner or whatever it is at your event, but carrying that theme through, having your MC embody a character and things like that, like it's not just within a single branded experience. Any event organizer at any level can probably take a cue from some of this too.
I think what's funny about food is that food can be such an evil aspect of events.
Very polarizing.
I just talked to somebody at an event very recently, and like one of the top 3 things they said was that the food was terrible. And like, you never want that to be like the lasting impression, that like the other things weren't better enough for you to forget about the food aspect. And so again, with that commitment, like if you're going to commit over here and say we put all of our money into like keynote or production or something, and that means the food is going to be horrible, it's like you have to pause and say, how then do we how do we accept this as a challenge and say we're going to make it more amazing, we're going to, you know, have everybody make their own food, and that's part of the experience, and we're not going to have any staff, whatever it is. Like, asking those questions, I think, is really important.
Yeah, that holistic approach I love. And by the way, for those of you guys watching, if you are a brand and you're not a media and entertainment brand, we're not just talking about Disney and Universal and those, right? We are talking about tech, we are talking about automotive, we're talking about healthcare. The application conceptually, I think, applies broadly to just about anybody that wants to create a unique experience. And MK, I love your food example, because like the top 3 weird things that event attendees do not like or most often find problems with, you'll never find somebody saying the temperature was great throughout, but if you're a little too cold or a little too hot, that's the whole show. Like that was it. I was too warm and blah, blah, blah. Same thing with like ambient noise levels. It's too loud for me to hear things, like, and then the food. You have to kind of nail the little things before you get to the big things.
For
Both
sure.
events and traditional theater, uncomfortable seats, you're done.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Totally. Now,
I love the thing about temperature.
On the brand front, let's talk a little bit about brands and the ability to kind of create that messaging, because I think, you know, the better a brand is at being able to take an event attendee and putting them into a persona type, right? It might be very, you know, it might be a developer conference, right? And you know they're developers, and so you're speaking directly to them. It might be, you know, C-levels, you know, C-suite people that they need to speak to directly, but they need to be able to capture a broad audience, right? You've got a lot of people coming into your space. You don't know who they are necessarily when they walk in. You don't know how to identify. And actually, Mike Moreno, I'll throw it over to you. How do you think that theatrical experience and performance can play into identifying individuals and then placing them within a role or a persona that they can kind of play throughout the event experience you're creating?
Yeah, for sure. It's the big variable, right? We sit there crafting an experience, working with our brand clients and the like, and just when we think we've got the storyline and we've mapped out the guest experience and we've got an outcome that they're going to be happy with, the big variable is the real protagonist is the guest. What are they going to do? How are they going to react to everything? And as you know, Mike, over the years, we have crafted things out, and the guests will take that 2-minute experience and turn it into something completely of their own making, so to speak. So I think the biggest challenge is we walk the fine line of, we'll have a brand that we're collaborating with that will want an experience to be on rails, and to toss in creative tension and go, where can we get this for the guest? We will say, okay, a point A to point B linear storyline on rails. For the guest, how can we give them a voice in this? How can we let them take some license for their own experience, like the Navy experience that we did, Mike? It's a perfect example of that, where we've crafted the scene and the storyline, but we give the guest as much control as possible over the journey and the outcome. That's, boy, you know, when you have it and you feel like, I think I've got the right mix of guest has license against the brand storyline, the time constraints, the venue constraints, and all of that. Years of trying to nail that, so to speak.
Yeah. Rita, so gonna throw it over to you and talking a little bit about not just theatrical, but balance, right? You've got this name. Let's use Samsung at CES, right? One of your guys, I've seen it almost every year for the last 9 years. You guys do an amazing job there. You've got this need for spectacle, right? You've got to have big wow. You've got Samsung, you've got screens, you've got appliances, you've got all the things that Samsung does. And then you've got substance, right? And you've got and how do you unify spectacle and substance? How do you get across that brand message in that theatrical way in a booth like that? Or take an example of any of the other MC Squared clients that you've gotten, and like, where do you find that happy place?
Yeah, I think that is a really good example. Samsung obviously has this sort of huge, beautiful visual landscape right when you get to their booth at CES. And, you know, the story this year, AI for all, was sort of the big thread, right? So having that story and then sort of centering around it, I think is key. There's this huge sort of billboard moment at that booth, but then when you walk in, you do get to sort of choose your own adventure, right? So it is designed with multiple pathways, and then through those pathways you have really interesting things happening. So one of the ones that got some of the most leverage, obviously because it's a cute little robot, is Bali, which is doing an in-house demo in one of the spaces. And so you have somebody who's interacting with the robot and not just doing it as a demo, but in situ. So they're in something that looks like a house, and this guy's like doing a workout, and Bali is projecting the workout like on the ceiling instead of on the wall, because that's what he needs to do his workout at the moment. And then the robot follows him around and, you know, is helping him order things, helping him make a phone call. And so just taking that step from this is a product demonstration to this is like a real life in situ moment that we've created, it is like, it only goes, you only have to do like this much more to take it to that next level, rather than, you know, it's some of the big box stores that we see where they have the person like with the blender doing the thing. Like that's a more traditional demo, right? In this case, building that in through the thread, I think is what makes it more interesting, more special. Then of course you have like Martha Stewart in the kitchen space doing a live demo. That's different. That falls under like the kinds of characters and influencers who you can bring into your space to help you tell your story. So that's also key and part of the thing that the 4 elements that we talked about, characters being one of them. I mean, to a certain extent, your staff, whether those are brand ambassadors or your own staff, are also a part of it, right? Some of our clients have paid professionals who are their staff, as it were. Like they're not just, you know, product manager A, they're professional trained speakers and presenters. That also gives you a different flavor at that scale of what you're talking about. We ask a lot of our tech and product people at all of our businesses, where they're the really smart, amazing minds. Are they the right ones always to be presenting? The movie that's coming out, Fly Me to the Moon, right? There's that whole the whole thing where they're going to shoot the landing on the moon, but they're going to fake it in case the real thing doesn't work out. That to me is hilarious, like meta example of the kind of thing that I'm talking about.
Yeah. Have you guys dealt with, you know, so we kind of really got into doing a lot of sports and marketing sports entertainment activations, because the storylines were so built in. But on the B2B side, you guys must have faced, and we certainly have, making a really intangible solution like a cloud computing platform or something that the storyline's so intangible, working your client through an experience on site that will resonate with the guest with something that doesn't necessarily have characters.
Yeah, the storyline is data.
Yeah, tough. Yeah.
It's hard. Like these are hard stories to tell, or even AI is a hard story to tell.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Sort of a twist on that, but I think it's the same as when we have clients who we have many who have large machinery and people think they know what the story is. So like that's basically the other side of the same coin. So one of my favorite entries into CES this year was Walmart, because it was their first time at CES. They came out with a great space with a 4D theatrical experience, also a keynote. But in 2019, that's also what John Deere. So John Deere showed up at CES. People were like, why is John Deere at CES? You know, they make tractors, right? Like full stop. And that is because of the story that John Deere at the time wanted to tell. And now they're really part of that tech story at CES, right? Like now they are a tech company. They were, but it was that story aspect that was sort of missing. And so the same with Walmart, they really came in this year with their retail, right? Like, we are a retail innovator. We have led the way in retail. They have a whole timeline on how they have changed the face of retail. And then their experience ends with a 4D immersive video. It's like California Adventure, speaking of Disney, where the seats move, there's blowing air, you smell strawberries as you're like wafting through a strawberry field. There's even like a burst of water. Okay. And obviously it was really memorable. I think coming at that story aspect, whether you're addressing people don't understand what we do or they think they understand what we do, but that's not it, I think is a really interesting challenge to think about. That's where I get more excited. Mike, what you said about brands want to get in front of a lot of people, right? I think it's that idea, asking that kind of question, right? Like, what story are you trying to tell, and what's that going to mean to different people, as opposed to we want to get in front of as many eyeballs. Like, I think is a slightly different shift in like how you get at an answer.
Yep. Yeah, that's another challenge, right? It's like, are we creating a singular experience for one guest at a time to go through and be really immersed, or are we dealing with a crowd of people? We've had to deal with, and I'm sure you have as well, a quick storyline at a keynote that has like 10,000 people.
Yeah, I do think that theatrical storytelling, that piece about the shared experience, it is key. So we were talking about this on my team, that this is not the same idea when you are creating a really interesting individual immersive experience. It's really that shared experience. MK and I were talking in advance about the Netflix demo at CES for 3 Body Problem, which I'm on episode like 8, so don't ruin it. And that being a really interesting example of both, right? So you go in, you have your literal individual virtual experience, but you're going through it with a group of people in this sort of interesting environment, that staging aspect that we talked about. I think that's what takes it to that next level. So one of the things that we talked about when we were prepping for this, right, was that immersive was sort of our buzzword. It's still obviously very important right now. But I feel like immersive oftentimes meant like very digital, very tech forward, very visual. And this idea around theatrical storytelling is really that sort of up-leveled. It's more sensory experience, although I feel like sensorial experience also has gotten sort of like overused. But that really concentrated effort between the physical immersion and then the feelings and the senses sort of really all coming together.
I think that's awesome. Well, it's a story, it's a mode of storytelling that goes back to like ancient Greece, right? So some of it is a matter of stripping away all of those complexities and embracing the fundamental conversation. What would a brainstorm look like if you really simplified? And to the point of having a theatrical background, I went to undergrad for theater management. Theater notoriously has no budget unless you're operating at Broadway scale, and even then they're pressing the limits of what they can do before they recoup. But almost anyone who you encounter who's had a theatrical background is used to that shoestring budget mentality of what are we trying to achieve and how does it get there in the simplest way possible. And so looking through that lens actually kind of challenges an event team in a different way. And I think every event team should have at least one person who had a theatrical background. And if you don't, go hire one.
I'm shocked that the theater major would call out ancient Greece and core tenets of storytelling. Well done.
And suggest that every team should have a person with a theatrical background.
I don't disagree with you at all. I think there's an example from our side recently that is interesting, right? As much as we play in the technology space and we love building augmented reality or virtual reality to immerse consumers into experiences, Rita, I think you're spot on, and MK, simplicity can totally carry the day. We were involved with an Amazon Prime Video project about a year ago. And if anybody has seen The Boys, you know that it is a very irreverent take on superheroes. The superheroes are kind of the bad guys. It is very very mature themed, and lots of swearing, lots of violence, lots of gore. It's really funny. It's a superb show. But their merch giveaway on site, instead of just doing a standard like come scan your badge, get a t-shirt, they actually had us saw a box truck in half, loaded up all the merch into the back of a truck, had guys dressed up as if they were criminals, and rolled up the back of the box truck and started handing out t-shirts to guests as if they were fencing stolen goods, right? Beautifully done. You're a guest, you're in the story, you feel like you're a part of it, you're immersed in the world. You've got this kind of play acting team where you're also getting something of value in return. Just a really, really smart and really simple way to switch up, merch and giveaways and tchotchkes. I thought it was, it's one of my favorite examples of immersion into a story. Now, it does stray into the world of entertainment, but man,
that's okay.
Yeah,
everything is entertainment, just like every company is a tech company. So, like I say, it's fair game.
Totally.
I like that idea. So, a project we did last year with 72 and Sunny for 1800 Tequila, I think is interesting because it was just built for influencers. So this is where you're really speaking to a specific audience. So how far in can you go to that audience? So it was the 1800 Tequila Taste Tiendita. It was a fully customized and prop space to look like a Tiendita in Los Angeles. And it was partnered and focused around Mexican American artists, where it's interesting is that it was a takeover of a space. So the whole thing looked like a store essentially. But then from the moment you walk in and interact with people, it was literally a hired actor who's at the front sort of greeting you like the owner, right? And you go through all of the experience through the store with everything propped out for 1800. And then you go through the refrigerator doors, which is like the portal to the speakeasy. There are a couple examples there that I think are really interesting that you can take into your events, which is those character moments, right? Like we had somebody who was in character from the beginning. That's your first interactive touch point with a real person. All the way through that portal idea. I think the portal to another world is another interesting thing that we're seeing it a lot, that you can do in booths, that you can do in pop-ups, where you're literally stepping from one moment into another moment, and how that looks, I think is really interesting. So in that case, right, I'd say it was a one night takeover for a few hundred people in an entire space, but those little sort of theatrical aspects you can bring in, whether you have, $1 million budget or a $20,000 budget. Again, like those elements for staging, for characters, for action, for connection, you don't necessarily have to have all four, but I would think about where you could lean into those to really up level the element of what you're trying to do.
Love it. So who out there is doing a really good job of this? Like, I know we've talked about our own, some of our own activations and some of the stuff that we've seen in the past. Are there any brands that you can think of? And this, by the way, this is a question for everybody, right? Brands that you can think of that are doing a really good job of establishing a story, living within it, sticking to it, and not just consumer brands, right? Like, I'll go first, and I'll take probably the layup. Salesforce, great example, right? Their Trailhead universe that they've created. And if you guys aren't familiar with Trailhead and with Einstein, it's kind of a cartoony take on the brand, right? It's meant to simplify what can be a very complex message. They've distilled it down into various characters and have taken that kind of national park message that cuts across sustainability, it cuts across product, and just done a really phenomenal job of creating a world that they are dedicated to, that they live within. And you see that replicated over and over. And if you guys have not been to a Dreamforce or a satellite Salesforce event, you'll see kind of how that plays throughout. And I think they've done a really fantastic job in the B2B space. but I'll throw it out to you guys, and any one of you go. Who's creating worlds that is compelling and creating unique experiences within it.
Well, I'll raise my hand. It's not necessarily a brand, but it was an approach to something that I attended an event that I expected to be one thing, and it took an entire arena of people in a completely different direction. I went to a Roger Waters concert, but it was The Wall, right? And
is this going to take a weird place, Moreno?
So we go to the.
It sounds like we're about to go weird.
With John Fox, he's a colleague of all of ours, and I was expecting to see a concert, and what I got was this massive spectacle theatrical production. I mean, literally, the concert started with an actual realistic-sized plane flying into the wall that was 200 feet wide on the stage and exploding. That's the way the concert started. And it never turned into a concert. It turned into a musical production that I was just like blown away. It was memorable and immersive, to say the least, for 20,000 people down in San Jose. And I think that's what some brands are kind of going for. We need to get this away from the nuts and bolts storyline to something that is kind of memorable in a journey and a storyline. And that did it. I still remember that experience as going, wow, I was expecting one thing. I thought I was going to see a musical performance, and I saw something much more, and it killed it.
I think one way to think about the question is when brands show up in weird places and what they do with that. So when you would talk about the Super Bowl, for example, the Super Bowl is no longer just the Super Bowl, right? Like, it used to be about a game, then it was about the ads, then it was about the halftime show, and now it's about everything, right? Like, the Super Bowl, for somebody like me, I'm not a sports ball person, right? But that experience I just described is how I experienced the Super Bowl, right? I used to just watch the ads, then I just watched the halftime show, and now I want to know everything else that's going on around it. And so I do think it's interesting how brands are showing up, whether it's the performers themselves, the players, or brands who are in the space, like specifically in Las Vegas, or just around the country, because those are interesting moments to be a part of with authenticity, right? So the Usher show, of course, I'm a woman of a certain age, so like during Usher, that was a moment. I had a shared experience with other women at that time. We were not in the same place, but we were in that same moment together. Plus, he brought on all the different cast of characters that he brought on, from Ludo to Alicia Keys. The Alicia Keys moment became another moment, right? That superseded the concert. And then her, my 6-year-old daughter knows who her is, right? She doesn't know Usher, but she knows her. So you take that along with like what else is happening in the sphere around it, right? So part of the Super Bowl experience is going on separately, right? Where that's a paid ticket entry of, you can see the trophy, you can see all the helmets, you can see all the do all the sports ball stuff. But you have a brand like Uber Eats who is there creating an app experience with a live deliver shopper moment. So to go in this beautiful, interesting shopper experience and get your little delivery, you do have to download the app. Okay, very smart. And you do have to order, very smart. So it takes you through that experience, and then you get a live thing. Okay, then, down the street, you have Paramount took over one of the beautiful spaces that is eluding me right now. Yes. And, created like a mountain for the logo, and then had all of their content in real life doing some kind of story. I think this idea of theatrical storytelling came across really well in their gondola ride. So you go through a 4D immersive gondola ride, and it's narrated by, the football peoples, Tony Romo. And then we have Pepsi, who's also doing multiple activities around the Super Bowl. One of them was the Pepsi Diner, right? Where it's outside, it's part of a full party experience, and you have somebody like Shaq who does a viral video with the TikTok guy about Pepsi. And what was interesting about that is that Shaq has his own brand, right? So the I'm gonna mess it up. Kavi LeMay. I'm gonna do his name wrong, but he doesn't talk, which is part of the whole experience, right? Like puts a big sandwich in front of Shaq, and Shaq's like, no. Puts another big sandwich, and he's like, no. Puts a small sandwich, and he's like, closer. Then puts a tiny Pepsi. Okay, yes, that's what I wanted, the tiny Pepsi. Like that all is around the Super Bowl, right? Like, is fascinating. And I think the idea of events being moments like this are being co-opted by everybody, right? Like, so our partner company runs Art Basel, the global art show, including Art Basel Miami. Art Basel Miami is also no longer just Art Basel Miami. People say people say they're going to Art Basel, and what they really mean is they're going to Miami during Art Basel.
They're going to Junior Southwest.
Yes, exactly. South by Southwest for higher level artists and people with more money, which is amazing, fantastic, beautiful. So the same thing happens there, where brands are showing up in Miami during this global art show. So one of the examples was McDonald's was at Art Basel, but they weren't. They were just in Miami at the same time, leveraging Art Basel, which is a good problem to have. Okay, let's be real. So they were there releasing a new line of McBuddy Nugget toys, which after I was at Miami, I was like, do you people know what this is? Like, because I don't eat at McDonald's. I'm gluten-free. I have been gluten-free for over 10 years. So sadly, I do not partake. But it was a really interesting immersive space. From the outside, the whole building looked like a giant Happy Meal. And then you go inside, and they have life-size McBuddy friends that are styled by an artist, Curran Frost. They did a collaboration. There was video content. There was a stage for a DJ. There was an outdoor space with like a diesel serving free Happy Meals. You got the actual McBuddy toy, and then you got to exchange it for a different toy if you didn't like that toy. And I'm thinking the whole time, McDonald's is at Art Basel, right? Like, when you show up at a place where you're not expected to be, that is so interesting if you can do it really well, right? Like, not everyone does it well. They show up, they want to leverage the audience, and then they don't have a very good story. That I would say is not a good example of how to do that. I know I'm blathering on, but one more story. Within the official Art Basel space itself, they obviously have a lot of really amazing sponsors. One of them is BMW. So, they can show a beautiful car, which they did, all electric BMW. But in the space, they're fully committed to the art and what's happening in all of the whole convention center. So their partnership was with an artist who created this really cool interactive digital AI experience where you're in the artist's memories and in his visuals, and there's like 7 immersive screens. But then you, as the audience member, so Mike, this kind of goes to what you were saying about that experience you're having. You can plug in your social, and then the AI creates your memories that you see one time in front of you, and then it goes away. Mm-hmm. So it's like the artist has created a moment about his life that relates to the car and the technology, but then you get to step into it, experience it, and then step back out of it. So those examples of how you show up in a place that is unexpected, sort of off kilter, and have something to say, I think is really interesting. That aligns too to some of the brands who show up at CES, not necessarily being known as tech companies, but then are there with a tech story. Seeing that more and more.
Sure.
I love that you had so many examples.
Yeah.
No, okay.
I know. I'm so excited about this.
No, it's perfect, because as I'm sitting there, I'm racking my brain thinking about experience I've been through, and maybe I just turned like hypercritical, and like the theatrical person in me became a little bit of a snob of experiences or something, because suddenly everything had a hole I could poke in it. I couldn't pick one that was truly excellent. And I've realized, and this might be a hot take, the antithesis of theatrical storytelling might be the Instagram walkthrough. The thing that is taking you out of the live moment and distracting you from being present and experiencing something and being there and thinking strictly about the photo moment you're capturing and what you're pushing out to social and the me broadcast of it all versus the absorption of content, the processing, the letting it sink in, the being present where you are. Save the Instagram moment, save the takeaway for the end of the experience, and keep people truly present during. That's the fleeting beauty of theater that so many of us love. That's the thing where things can go wrong and the unexpected happens. And if all you're doing, I thought of, it was like South Park at Comic-Con. It created a million photo ops for fans, which is great. It was in the front lobby of Comic-Con. Great. As soon as you arrive, flex that you're there, share it on your stories. But no way would I call that theatrical in any way. As immersive as a walkthrough as they create, it was strictly about sharing and flexing versus partaking.
Yeah, versus big story, big memorable moment, right? And you know, there's something about the flex of you capture something on Instagram and posting it that it gets you a little dopamine hit, right? When you do the social. But man, when you can put that away and when you can actually immerse yourself, I'm with you, MK. Like it's more meaningful when you can create something that's so meaningful and memorable that people forget to pick up their phone, right? They forget to pick it because they're actually just in it. I do want to say, Rita, one story I had from the Super Bowl this year. It's not quite theatrical, but it dovetails and it was memorable for me just because I thought it was such a smart activation. Bounty paper towels. I don't know if you saw them, but man, they brought along plates of wings, and not just wings, but like messy, dripping sauce everywhere, just a disaster. You would never think to like bring out these messy, but they'd let somebody grab a wing and then they would hand them a roll of paper towels. And you're like, that's just smart. I don't know if that's actually like theatrical as opposed to like experiential. I don't know how you want to define that, but I love that. I love the simplicity of it. I love this just being a really smart way to approach things.
Well, but that's like
I thought it was
in real
really
life. That's like a real life use case, right? It's like what I was saying about the robot in the Samsung booth. It could have just been a robot doing a thing. Instead, it was doing a real thing that you can relate to. I think that's funny and fun to have the wings and the paper towels. That's what you would want it for.
Yeah. No, I also love the thematically that you're going to the unexpected, right? There's everything from John Deere appearing at a conference that you don't anticipate they'd appear at, or a brand like a McDonald's appearing at a high-end event like an Art Basel, right? Like just that dichotomy of the unexpected is going to grab attention. I think that attracts eyeballs to say, what are they doing here? And then, you know, to your point, how do you take advantage of that? Okay, I have your attention. Now what? That just the presence there has earned me a short period of time. Now, how am I going to capitalize on that? And I think that's where, you know, the drama and the theater can really come out and really shine.
I want to follow up on
okay, so
it's okay. I was just going to follow up on what MK said, which was around that taking people out of the moment. I think it's an interesting question because in a literal theater show, you can't have your phone, right? So you're not supposed to have your phone. You're not supposed to be taking content. You're supposed to be there enjoying it and experiencing it. So I think that's an interesting thing as well. There was a show a while back where on the show they created an event where nobody could take in their phones. So everybody had to drop their phone. So it made it more interesting that you couldn't have your phone, right? Like not just that you weren't posting about it then, but that it made you be in the moment, right? I think that's really interesting. Finally, we were on a call, I want to say literally today, talking about, we were brainstorming an idea and the account person said, like, is that going to be a photo moment? We're like, this whole thing is a photo moment. We don't actually have to try to make a photo moment, right? Like the whole thing will inspire you at some point to want to capture your content. But I think what you said, MK, is really interesting. That question of how do you make it so interesting and like exciting that they like forget or just can't or run out of time to have content and then have to like figure it out later. That's an interesting problem to have.
Yeah, we're using the words immersive and stuff like that, but we're not saying like, I don't want to throw shade at those Instagram museums and stuff, and they
No.
are immersive. You are having perhaps a collective experience as everyone gets to the ball pit room and the sampling room and stuff like that. But I don't know that I would ever refer to them as theatrical. It's just not the trigger they're doing.
Yeah, we used to get in this kind of no man's land, but back in the early days of immersive, everybody was trying to get this singular experience that the guest would be completely, all their sensory perception would be taken over in the experience. And then we would get on site, we might have a VR experience or something that is really contained to deliver that. And then on site at an event, you'd realize we need something more spectacular. This isn't a spectacle that we've created. It's a singular experience. And that's also kind of we definitely over the years kind of, got into that category of how do we manage that? How do we make sure that we use second screens to project what the individual is going through to make it look big and spectacular? But that was a tough one to solve as well when it came to theatrics and things like that. Next thing you know, your client would be next to somebody that has a giant 100-foot LED screen and something massive going on, and you're like, man, our experience is crafted perfectly, but all the eyeballs are on that.
Yeah, it's a good way to see, I think there's some really smart uses of technology. I mean, gosh, I can't say that and then go right into my own example. Crap. It's too self-serving. All right, I'll skip it. But no, when you think about big spectacle, I think that's important, right? You need sightline, you need attention, you need big AV installation, right? Sometimes that can be incredibly powerful. I mean, anybody who's ever walked on the show floor of an E3, RIP.
I was about
E3.
to say,
I know, I missed it. It was so fun when I was younger. Big explosions and loud noises and screens everywhere, very overwhelming. But those can be very helpful, right? You need to do something to draw the audience, right? It can't just be saying I have a presence here. You need to create and attract, and that attract very often can be that spectacle. And then you've got that kind of engagement, immersion opportunity to say, here is going to be that moment, whether it's a, playful, you're part of the story, whether it's a virtual or augmented reality experience or something.
I'd also add to that what you're saying with it goes into magic for me. What a trapdoor, a turntable, all of the little things that old school theater and stuff, we were talking about it, I think it came up a little bit with our keynote stuff, what projection on a scrim and really intentional covering and revealing of content and stuff can do. That's, in my mind, very much the theatrical cues of changing someone's connection to the content, for sure.
Do you guys, Rita, in the creation of, I'm sure you guys do a lot of things related to big keynotes and things like that. Do you, and it reminded me of theatrical approaches, another challenge that we run into a lot is creating some sort of a keynote storyline, and then we get the thought leader or the CEO of the company that is like, I don't need to rehearse. I am going to let this fly when I get up on stage. We're like, no, don't do that. It's not going to. And they're completely confident. And you never know. I mean, the audience buys into this person big time. They're the heroic figure. They're the CEO of the company that they all have an affinity for. But that one's another one where we've hovered over this thing for 60 days trying to get this just right. And now the CEO of the company, who's going to be the central figure, the protagonist of this storyline, has given it the day before practice and rehearsal.
That is, I think, always going to be a challenge in the space that we're in, that with different personalities. I think the idea that it is a show, right, and putting the onus on our clients and the groups that they work with, that Hamilton, they didn't do that off the cuff, right? Right. They prepared for that, and Beyonce doesn't do her tour without rehearsal, lots of it, and I think that's interesting, taking it into that show aspect. This idea, and what you said earlier, Shaman, about when it's a data story or it's cloud or maybe Moreno, I'm sorry, which I don't remember which Mike said it, that they're trying to get so much across about what they've accomplished, and sometimes I think we lose sight of that story that they're telling and how to really relate it to people who maybe understand certain percentages of it. So again, making it about the story and like, are you really building this for your audience? And are you building it for investors? Are you building it for your board? Are you building it for the users? Are you building it for people who don't know what it is? I think should really push us into making more discrete decisions, which is hard. That's hard for companies to do, whether they're startups or have been around for a long time, because they sort of think they know what they want to talk about. But I think it's really interesting, that idea around the speaker as the content. So it's not just the content. The speaker is also the content. That's why you have a Martha Stewart who comes and does a demo in your booth. It's not just what she's demoing, it's her that's demoing it. That idea that these people are characters in the story that you're trying to tell. Are you leveraging the right characters, or do you need different characters or not? I think those can be like Google at CES, right? Their Android is a character, right? That's a big, literal, physical Android character who you could also do an AR experience that like pops up over the Las Vegas Convention Center, right? Like any choice like that, where you're taking, whether it's a cartoon character or a mascot character or a real character, your leadership, leveraging them in the right way is such an opportunity in this idea of theatrical storytelling. There's, I think, a lot more opportunities specifically in that space that doesn't really cost that much money if you're not using celebrities. Like that's one way you could do something at scale. I think everybody should do presentation classes, like of some kind, speaker training. Even like me, I still need to do it too. We talk about pitch theater in our work, like, right? We don't just want to get on a call and be like, here's all of our stuff, right? Like, how do we really talk about it and get it across in a compelling way? We're going to have this problem as long as we're an agency.
Yeah. Gosh, and now you remind me, of course, when you say speaker training, that I haven't reset the room, and we're already coming to an end. So, you know, whether you have been joining us on LinkedIn Live or X or YouTube or any of the other platforms on which we're broadcasting, I appreciate you all. My name is Mike Shaman, CEO of Gen City Labs. Today, Rita Price with MC Squared, also Mr. Moreno, Mrs. Granados from the GCL team. So I'll leave it with one last question, one quick lightning round around the horn. And usually I like to make these kind of future looking and very, very general, so you can kind of interpret it. Are there any events? We've already mentioned Super Bowl and Art Basel. Are there any events in particular that lend themselves to theatrical storytelling? Or you can either take that, or what coming up in the not too distant future are you super excited about as a medium for them? And if you want, while you guys think about that for a second, I'll go first. We've done a lot of work with Live Nation, Lollapalooza, EDC, Governor's Ball, name your big music festivals. So I will say that watching the evolution of music festivals, not just the festivalization of events, which I think is a totally separate topic and we could do an entire session on, but watching what's happening at music festivals and the storytelling and the opportunities to engage an audience in unique ways at an event of that type has been super fascinating. It's one to keep an eye on. And one that I think there's probably opportunities to create, to read at MK's point, to create the unexpected moment for brands. So there's mine. One of you guys, who's next? MK, what do you got?
So the event that comes to mind for me is VidCon. I think taking that audience that fundamentally understands a character, a narrative in short form content, and building on that further will only elevate what they're fundamentally doing anyway. That's what leveling up VidCon could be to me. More photo ops and meet and greets and stuff is cool, but brands bringing their A game and truly meeting those storytellers at their level and beyond would be really cool.
It's a really good one. Rita, what do you got?
In a few weeks, I'm getting ready to go to C2 Montreal. This will be my first time, and I'm really excited to kind of delve more into the creative space and get to take my different hat and put it on. They're also taking a shift in like what they're focusing on in his event. So I'll be curious to see sort of what we come out of it with. So I'm super excited about that one.
Awesome. Right on, Moreno,
Yep.
take us home.
For me, the biggest opportunity that I see is, those events that take place over a relatively lengthy period of time. An example would be the US Open tennis tournament. What the brands know is that this is going to be going for 2 weeks, and the same 30, 40,000 people are going to come day after day for 2 weeks. It amazes me that that brands don't craft an ever-changing story and experience over the 2-week period that keeps people coming back. Instead, it's the same. I already saw that activation. I'm going to go right past it. I know what goes on in there. A week later, you have time to do something completely different over the course of that and make it an experience that lasts.
I love that.
I love it. Extended engagements and evolving
State
story
fairs
line.
have figured that out with the butter sculpture. Okay, it takes the full couple of weeks of a state fair to see that thing come to life. I mean, everyone should be taking a page from that. Yeah.
Well, there you go, everybody. We have Samsung experiences at CES and butter sculptures at your local state fair. We appreciate everybody who was able to join us on whatever platform they did. We appreciate you all. We will be back in a few weeks. Rita, thanks so much for spending some time with us today.
Rita.
This is awesome. Great to see you, and thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.